So what are we doing today? We're actually going to be looking at graphing equations. Now, what you need to realize is that every time we create a line, we need a minimum of 2 points. Now, we can get those points from a table of values. We can get those points by finding the x and y intercepts for any line. And we can also get it from finding the y-intercept and then using the slope to find a second point. Now, how do you know that you understand what's going on? You're going to be able to create lines using either one of those three concepts. As a preliminary, we need to remember that we're going to use two different kinds of calculations for rise over run. I am usually going to focus on this type of calculation. Y equals y2, m is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, because we can easily calculate that. Now, there might be one problem today that I might actually show you how to calculate the rise over run using the change in x and the change in y. Moving on. Taking a look at this graph that we have here, we have a positive slope. So let's go and label the points that we are going to use for our slope calculation. We have two intercepts. We have the x-intercept and the y-intercept. Let's just use those. So now what we need to do is we need to label each of these points x1, y1, and x2, y2. Now let us describe the line. First thing you need to realize is that the x-intercept is -2, which really means that the point that's associated with it is -2, 0. You'll notice that our y value is 0 again. Now, the next thing that we're going to be taking a look at is our y-intercept. So our y-intercept is actually, if I look at the graph, you'll notice it is 2, which means that the point that's associated is 0, 2. And you guys got to note that in this case, the x value is 0. And now let's describe the slope. If you take a look at the slope, we would say that it has an upward trend. Sometimes you would say that it is uphill as we move from left to right. Another way to describe this would be to say that it is I believe, a positive slope. So let's add that as our next point. Now, let's take a look at what we have to do next. The next thing we have to do is we need to identify our b value. In this case, it's 2, because we're referring to the y-intercept. And now, let's go about calculating the slope for this line. Well, when we calculate the slope, we're going to use the equation m is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. You'll notice that I have labeled all of those variables to the right on our graph, and so I'm just going to substitute directly in. And removing those signs, you're going to get 2 minus 0 over 0 plus 2, which simplifies to 2 over 2, which means that our slope is equal to basically 1. Now, combining all the information that we have to restate our final equation for our line. So we'll just write, well, y is equal to, as you know, mx plus b. So when we substitute, we're going to get y equals 1x plus b, or just y equals x plus 2. And we're done. as our final solution. Okay? Now remember, at the end of each of these, you must state your final solution and highlight it for me. So now we have another problem where we have a negative slope. First, we're going to identify each of the initial points, I guess intercept points I'm using. So one point is 1, 0, and the other is 0, 1. I'm going to call 1, 0 x2, y2, and 0, 1 to be x1, y1. Now, for the description, we have to identify the x-intercepts, the y-intercepts, all that stuff. So, first of all, the x-intercept for this problem is equal to 1, which means the coordinate that goes with it is 1, 0. And you'll note that we always have, for the x-intercept, its y-coordinate is 0. Now, let's go and take a look at the y-intercept. The y-intercept in this case is 0, 1, because our y-intercept is 1. And in this case, our x value is going to be 0. Now, we'll have to go and describe what our b value is for our line equation. Our b value should be 1, but our slope is negative in this regard since it's decreasing as we move from left to right. And what I'd like you to note is that our b value is 1. Now, remember, our slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now we'll do our appropriate substitutions. So you're supposed to get 0 in brackets minus 1 divided by, in brackets, 1 minus 0 in brackets. Your final answer is going to be 1 minus 0 over 0 minus 1 over 1 minus 0, which is negative 1 over 1, which simplifies to m is equal to negative 1. Now, the last thing that we have to do is we have to make sure that we identify our b value. Our b value is 1. So now let's state our final equation. So remember, we use y equals mx plus b. And since we have that, now we just substitute what we know. In this case, we have y is equal to negative 1x plus 1, which simplifies to just the equation is this. Y equals negative 1x, or negative x, plus 1. Make sure you highlight that as your final answer. So now we have another problem where we have a line that's horizontal. We're going to pick 2 points on our line. The first one is 0, 3, and the second point is going to be 5, 0. Now, we know that this line is considered horizontal, so that's one of the things that we're going to have in our description. But the first thing that we need to know is there an x-intercept? And in this case, it doesn't exist. There is none. When you have a horizontal line, there is no, for this specific problem, no x-intercept. The only time you would have any x-intercept is if the horizontal line was the x-axis. In this case, we do have a y-intercept, and now we're going to say that the y-intercept is 3. We say that the slope is horizontal or 0. This point for this graph is 0, 3. And you'll notice that x is equal to 0 at that point. So now, let's do our calculations. Now we're going to take a look at the actual b value for our equation y equals mx plus b. In this case, our b value is going to be 1. Nope, sorry, 3. Now we'll calculate our slope with y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. I'm going to assume that the rightmost point is going to be our x2, y2. So now we have 3 minus 3 over 5 minus 0. Simplifying this, you eventually get m equals 0. Now that we have our m and we have our b, what we want to do is we want to restate our final equation. Our final equation is going to be y is equal to mx plus b. Substitute directly in, you're going to get 0x plus b. Anything times 0 is 0, so we end up with y is equal to 3 as our final equation. And I really need to emphasize the type of equation that we have here. Y equals 3 will always be a slope is 0. It could be y equals 0, y equals 50, y equals 10, y equals negative 350. They will always be 0. That is the slope. So a lot of the times when you see a vertical line, it's going to look something like this, where it crosses the x-axis and it just goes straight up and down. My first point is going to be 4, 0, and my second point I'm going to choose to be 4, 3. Now, let's talk about the description. The x-intercept for this is always going to be whatever value x is equal to. So in this case, it's going to be x is 4, which means our intercept point is 4, 0. And in this case, our y is equal to 0 in that case. Now, for our y-intercept, we have some issues. There aren't any y-intercepts because in this case, there is no y-intercept unless our graph actually goes through the origin. Now, the next thing that I need you to realize is that our b value doesn't exist because we don't have a y-intercept. So let's go and calculate the slope just quickly, and let's see what comes out of that. You'll notice that when we start the slope, you need to realize that eventually the slope is going to be infinite. And we also call it undefined. So now when we start the calculations, we're going to have m is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now, we do our substitutions, and nothing is out of the ordinary for the top portion of the fraction, but the bottom of the fraction is, well, for lack of a better word, a problem. We end up with a number divided by 0, which is undefined, and in mathematics we absolutely hate that. So we'll just call it undefined, and then the moment I know that my slope is undefined, you know that all you need is to say x equals your final answer. In this case, our example is x equals 4 for our vertical line. So just take down this note, and then we'll move on to our homework for the day, because we still have 2 more concepts to look over. So now we're taking a look at parallel lines. Now the first line is going to be A, the second line is going to be B. When we write up our solution, we're going to have a description of the description for A and a description for B, because they'll have 2 different x-intercepts and 2 different y-intercepts based on the graph that we see here. The only thing that's going to tie them together is their slopes. They should be the same. So now, let's identify some information about line A. So, line A, when I take a look at line A, I think if you look at line A, we're going to identify some key points, and then we're going to identify x-intercepts and y-intercepts. So, the first point that we look at is 0, 1, so that means our y-intercept is 1, which means our key point is 0, 1. Okay, and now our our y-intercept for line B is going to be, well, 0, -3, because it's crossing the y-axis, so our y-intercept is 3, which means the point that's associated with it is 0, -3. Now let's go take a look at the x-intercepts for both of these graphs. They both cross the x-axis. Now, for line A, I'm going to identify the point of -1, 0. Now that I have -1, 0, my x-intercept is -1, which means my point is -1, 0. For my x-intercept on line B, I'm going to identify the point 3, 0, which means that my point is 3, 0, and our x-intercept is 3. Now, the B value for line A, we just have to read it from our y-intercept, and that's just simply 1, and we can do the same thing for B. And we have B is equaling -3. So now, the other thing that we'll say is that both of these lines are parallel and they are positive. Okay. Now, let's go and do some calculations for slopes for line A and line B. Let's do that now, and we'll put it in the bottom left corner of our calculation for slope. So let's calculate m little a to begin. M little a is just going to be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And it's going to be identical to the calculation that we started with at the beginning of the day, where we just substitute back in and we get our slope to be 1. go and calculate the slope for B. Because we're trying to save some time today, we can literally say similarly when we do our calculations, we'll find out that the slope of B is also equal to 1. Now, here's what I need to do. We need the equations for both line A and line B. So let's set up some labels. For line A, okay, we're going to say we have y is equal to x plus 1. And for line B, we're going to also have y is equal to, instead of 1, x plus 1, we're going to have x minus 3 as our final equations. And we're done. For this new problem set, we're dealing with perpendicular lines. And we're going to just quickly make sure we identify them. Now, when we do these problems, all the points have to be labeled, so let's just quickly label them. I'm going to call line A the slope, the graph that is a positive slope, and line B the slope that has the line that has a negative slope. Now, we'll have two descriptions. We'll have a description for A and a description for B. Alright, well, let's do this. So, first of all, the x-intercept for A is -1, just like before, and our y-intercept is going to be similar to as before as well. Our y-intercept is just going to be 1, which means our new point is 1, 0. No, 0, 1, actually. Now, the other thing that we want to make sure of is we identify our b value. The b value is exactly the same as we had before, where b was 1. Now, it is also a positive slope. Now, let's go take a look at description B. Description B has a slope that goes from a greater number to a lower number as we move from right to left. We consider that a negative slope. In this case, when we look at our graph, our x-intercept is 4, which means our point that's associated with it is 4, 0. Our y-intercept is going to be 4, which means our point associated with it is 0, 4. Now, our b value is going to be 4 based on our y-intercept, and the slope is going to be negative. All that's left to do now is to take a look at the slopes of each line. Now, the slopes of each line basically allow us to compare the slopes. So when I take a look at slope A, I just do my normal calculations, and you'll know in the end we're going to get a slope of 1, just like before, because we're using the same points. Now, once that's done, we're going to take a look at slope B. Now, we had discussed the negative reciprocal yesterday, so we're going to identify if there is a negative reciprocal happening here. So, for slope A, we get m as 1. When we calculate the slope for B, we get the following substitutions. We're going to get m is equal to, well, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And now, when we do our substitution, we should get 0 minus 4 on the top divided by 4 minus 0. And upon further simplification, you're going to end up with a slope of -1 for slope B. Let's write out the equations for the lines immediately upon completing this. You'll notice that m is 1 and m is negative 1. M is 1 for A and m is negative 1 for B. Those are just negative reciprocals of each other. So let's go and write out the equation for A. The line A is y equals x plus 1. For line B, we also have y is equal to negative x, but this time its y-intercept is 4, so we're going to have plus 4. And line A is perpendicular to B because of the negative reciprocals that we're going to highlight on our slope calculations. Okay? And that's it. We're pretty much done. Now, if I asked you, you need to tell me that line A is perpendicular to line B because their slopes are negative reciprocals of each other. You could easily tell me that on an assignment or a test. Alright, and now we're finished our package for the day. All that's left to do is to write down the types of linear functions that are available to us. So, for the equation of a line, a linear function basically is represented by the equations y equals mx plus b, or ax plus py plus cz equaling 0, or having ax plus by equaling c. Both are valid for standard forms of your equation. And that's your homework for the day. Practice, skills, review. So for these problems, you're going to be doing a little bit of decoding and a little bit of graphing. Good luck, guys. So decoding will be identifying the slope and all these different things, and then also graphing will be something that you'll be doing as well.